Welcome or welcome back to WatchAdvisor on YouTube. It's Alexander speaking, your host. With me is Fred Mandelbaum. Fred, very warm welcome.
Pleasure to meet you.
He is a huge chronograph collector, wristwatch collector, and historian. And I dare to say he is the man who has the most knowledge about historical Breitling watches and maybe is also the biggest Breitling historical watch collector.
I think you can safely say that, yes.
Okay, I dared to do it.
Yeah.
So we are here to bring you an incredible story. The Navitimer, and please, guys, Navitimer. Never say Navy timer because this watch has nothing to do with the Navy. Maybe some Navy pilots use the Navitimer on the wrist, but it's the Navitimer because it's linked with navigation and not with the Navy. So the Navitimer, 70 years. We're looking back to 70 years of history.
Absolutely, 70 years of the model itself. The roots go a bit deeper, as I'll try to explain afterwards.
With our video, we are also presenting you the latest member of the new Navitimer family. It will be the Cosmonaute. So we're going to bring you the history and present you, so please stay tuned until to the end, the Cosmonaute, the latest edition with the 24 hours.
Don't forget to subscribe and to hit the bell to get our latest notifications.
Lots of stories have been told and reported, written about the Navitimer.
I've been helping George with grounding the Breitling history, documenting the Breitling history since he took over the management position at Breitling in 2017. And like with everything, there's lots of myth and lots of stories, and many stories are, copy-pasted in the internet and then become truth, quote unquote. So what we've done during the last years is go as deep as possible into the archives, meet with people who were witnesses to the original history then. And now we're very confident with what we can present because we really know what happened and don't have to rely on stories and myth. The roots of the Navitimer actually go into the late 1930s. Willy Breitling was 19, hard to believe, when he took over the company. His father had died. He had studied business administration, but he was very engineering-minded as a person. He looked into making the chronograph a very specific tool for certain markets. So tool watch for mathematicians, businessmen, and engineers was the chronomat. He took the logarithmic slide rule that was the pocket calculator of the times. Everybody studied it in school. Every mathematician, businessman, engineer used it on a daily basis. He put that slide rule on the chronograph, combined them, chronograph for mathematicians. That's the root of the name. So the patent was applied for in I think, August 1940.
1940.
1940. It was then the only slide rule chronograph. It was, in a way, the first smartwatch in many ways, because this is what he wanted to do with it.
But is it right to say that they also tried to sell that watch as two-in-one watches? So they sold it as a chronograph?
With a slide rule you'd have with you anywhere.
Okay.
But yes, that's very typical of Willy. He looked into the watch and said, okay, everybody's doing watches. We are the chronograph company. So our watches are used in sports, they're used in business, they're used for production control. So it was very much a tool that people used. And he went a step further and added that slide rule calculator on the watch.
As dependable as the airplane's instruments, his Breitling chronomat, the watch with a brain. It carries its own slide rule which solves most mathematical problems. In addition, it's a stopwatch and a precision timepiece for everyday use.
And in many ways, in design and basic functionality, these are the roots of the Navitimer. Because the Navitimer is, quote unquote, just a variation of that original logarithmic slide rule as an E6B flight computer. That's what these watches, that's what these tools were called then. The approach we see with the chronomat is actually very much the root and the birth of that concept. In our attempts as collectors over the years, we always knew how important the United States were for Breitling, because many of the innovations were really geared towards the US-American market in the beginning. Now, with all that background, of course, he was working with military pilots in supplying cockpit chronographs, etc. And of course, many of those were also members then of the beginning AOPA, which was then and is until today the largest civilian pilots association.
Aircraft
the
owners?
Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And I think most of the pilots until today are members of AOPA. Of course, AOPA tried to grow and needed money to grow. One of the ways was doing their own merchandising. Then they came up with the idea to do an AOPA-specific chronograph. They contacted Jack Karasik, who was the guy working with them. That was early 1952, and said, could you please work out a concept, an idea of a watch that was never made before, that will be specifically and recognizably our AOPA chronograph. And Jack then, knowing the chronomat, of course, and knowing the possibilities the chronomat had, went to Willy and said, look, these are the requirements. They're talking about an order of 1,000 pieces, which was huge then, okay, for Breitling at least, and I think in the chronograph world for almost anyone. Can you come up with an idea? So what Willy then did is he took the basic concept of the 1940 chronomat, he grew it to a size it could easily be used as a tool in the cockpit. The 1940 chronomat, we'd consider it very small today. I still consider it lovely and elegant. It was 36 millimeters. It wasn't big enough to be operated with gloves in the cockpit, and really thought they needed something bigger with larger numerals, so it will be legible and easy to operate, because you needed to set that in seconds. You didn't have time to concentrate on setting your watch. You need to automate that, so you'd have the calculations in seconds and immediately. So we grew it to 40 millimeter.
40.
Yeah. It was relatively slim then, and now it was around 11 millimeter, 11.25, if you want to be very precise, because the domed crystal it had then and has now. But optically it was 11 millimeter high, so actually quite slim. We do have a bit of a variation during the very, very early production runs of the case shape. The very first 100 pre-production had a bit what we call truncated locks, like cut-off lugs, that apparently the guys at the AOPA didn't like so much, or whatever. We don't know who decided to change it, but very quickly, weeks after it, we see the next production run, and this already had the tapered, slimmer, slightly longer, about 47 millimeters long lugs that we have on the Navitimer for many years on vintage Navitimers, and now again on our recent launches, very typical lines that case has and hugs your wrists, and even if large, sits on the wrist very, very well. And that's also always a question we are being asked, why 1952? Did you start mass production, etc.? And there were, again, lots of stories that are nonsense. Willy always celebrated 1952 as the year Project Navitimer was born, when he was contacted to develop the watch, and the first quote-unquote very small mass production run was July 1954. So he started prototyping it in 1953 and then mass producing it 1954. And AOPA presented the watch originally as an AOPA exclusive watch, because this is what it was. It was a 1,000-piece order that Breitling had received.
There was no name Breitling on it.
No, you'll see that actually that remained the fact with all AOPA distributed watches for many years, is they didn't have the Breitling branding on the dial. The dial said AOPA Navitimer, and you just had Breitling on the case back as the manufacturer. You'll see that the first, to be precise, I think 1,800 pieces, because they quickly saw that 1,000 pieces weren't enough. The first 1,800 pieces were actually even produced without a Breitling reference number. Breitling, typically starting in the 1930s, used 3 4-digit reference numbers for their high-end chronographs, 4-digit references for their entry-level chronograph line. So Navitimer had no model reference because it wasn't exclusive. And then we see a very small production run of first edition Valjoux Cal 72 Navitimers manufactured with the reference number that all the collectors know, 806. And then the watch became part of the standard core catalog and became a legendary icon in the years to come.
And if not sold by OPA directly, it had also the Breitling name on it.
That is true.
Yeah.
They loved the wings, but somehow didn't find the right place to write Breitling. So you'll see several variations of Breitling logo
squeezed
placement.
in.
Squeezed in upper, squeezed in there, with Genève, without Genève. It actually took until 1965 until they said, okay, wings, fine, okay, but we just don't have the space for branding on it. And then the non-AOPA Navitimers get the twin plane logo, or twin jet, and the OPA remained the OPA, of course. So he doubled the first 1,000 and said, okay, we'll make 2,000 of that first trial run. The last 200 already had a model reference, so they became part of core catalog, but still had the Valjoux 72. But then here we have production runs of 200 or 300, okay? But the moment he decides, okay, we'll go for it, he moves it to the standard Venus 178 caliber that he uses as a standard quote-unquote engine for his high-end chronographs, and starts production runs of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and starts to distribute the watch, continues to distribute it through AOPAs. We do not know which percentage went to AOPA. We don't have copies of sales records, sadly, just production records, and there's no difference in the production records. But gut feeling says about 50% worldwide continued to be sold through AOPA, and the rest was sold through the regular Breitling dealer network. Again, 806 reference number, and holding the Venus 178. Dimensions didn't change. Okay, what we see, but that's something for the true collectors and connoisseurs. We start with a beaded bezel, rice beads bezel, and over the years, the beads get larger, so you have less beads, of course. So somebody who's into collecting Navitimers will look at a Navitimer and will tell you at first sight whether it's made between 1954 and 1956 or whether it's 56 and later. So you see that actually in the end of the 1950s, going back, Breitling was mesmerized by space flight, by the Sputnik. Breitling did a desk clock called Sputnik, and Willy Breitling was dreaming about people traveling to the moon, traveling to the Mars, satellites, everything that actually, I mean, we haven't reached Mars yet, but very much of what's happening in space today is something Willy Breitling wrote about.
I remember my father was completely crazy about space. He loved everything when we are talking about space. And when the Sputnik was launched, he said that's something incredible. Can you imagine, Gregory? Something is turning over our head. And we can hear at the radio, because at that time do not exist any television and things like that. We switch on the radio and the speaker said, ladies and gentlemen, now at Europe 1, we have pleased to hear the beep beep of the Sputnik. And I listened, beep, 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 beep. It was amazing, it was fantastic. And for this task, my father said, oh, it's so impressionant, I will create a table clock with a Sputnik. And I show it to you briefly. Look at, it was just for this moment.
Yeah.
He created a table clock with the figure of the Sputnik.
Beautiful.
So one day in 1961, Breitling received a phone call from a guy called Scott Carpenter. Scott Carpenter was one of the Mercury-7 astronauts. He was the second to orbit the Earth in space, in outer space, after John Glenn. And he was responsible for navigational equipment among the astronauts. And actually, let him tell you the story.
Before going up, when you were in Australia, you were flying with the Royal Air Force, and they were wearing Breitling watches, and you saw them, and you thought they were nice, and maybe you should have one. And as I understand it, you were the first astronaut in space to actually fly with a wristwatch. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a dandy watch with a rotating bezel that gave you a circular slide rule. I'd never seen a watch like that, and when I came back from Australia, I wrote Breitling and said, this is what the American astronaut team would like to have. We don't need the tachymeter scale, so you can take that off to make room for a 24-hour dial. And can you make it for us? And a few days before I flew, they sent me the new Navitimer with a 24-hour dial, no tachymeter scale, and the word Cosmonaute replacing Navitimer on the dial, because I liked the watch. I wore it for a long time.
As Scott says, he received the watch days before the flight. Yeah, what happened there is, due to instruments failure, Scott overshot the planned landing sites by hundreds of miles. Instead of minutes to rescue him, it took almost 4 hours. So the Navitimer then was a bit less waterproof as today, and it still isn't very waterproof. And seawater can be a killer to any watch. So it was submerged for hours, and the watch didn't survive. And until this May, actually, the world, things I've known for some years, but also for decades, was sure that the original flown Scott Carpenter watch had been lost. Okay, we've heard that it was destroyed. We heard that it was incorrectly restored, etc. And again, looking at who Willy Breitling was, for him, this was, that had something holy for him, the first Swiss wristwatch in space. So he got the watch back, first of all said, okay, I'll restore it and send it back. And then he said, look, no, I'll build a new watch for Scott, and some weeks later, Scott and John Glenn and Gus Grissom, etc., the other astronauts too, received their cosmonauts. But the original flown watch, Breitling put it into a safe with all the damage, with all the seawater. Was lucky enough to have it in my hand. It's a piece of history, and it has something totally magic, but it's an object today. It isn't a watch anymore, but it has that originality down to there's probably still a lot of salt in there. They didn't clean it, didn't do anything to it. They just put it aside, gave Scott Carpenter a brand new Cosmonaute, and didn't touch it for years. And for many years, Gregory Breitling didn't feel comfortable to show it, because again, for him, this was his father, the dreams of his father that he was holding in his safe. And then when George took over and we together, in a way, uncovered that period of greatness under Willy Breitling, Gregory felt comfortable enough to say, okay, the watch that you thought was lost forever, here it is.
And just to make that clear, guys, you clearly heard Fred saying the first wristwatch flown to space. There might be some of you saying, no, Breitling wasn't the first. This was a pocket watch attached within...
Actually a stopwatch,
stopwatch.
Not a watch actually,
yeah.
but a stopwatch.
Just to clarify this, just in case you are among those saying, they are wrong. We are not. We are talking always about the wristwatch, the entire wristwatch. Okay, just to make the Swiss wristwatch flown to space.
There's absolutely zero doubt about that. For me, that's the grail of tool watches in many ways, but it doesn't get better than that. Okay, an astronaut, and we're talking about the pioneers. This was pioneering innovation, the epitome of innovation. Then, okay, calls you and asks you. He dreamed about a watch, okay, and he tells you, okay, that's great, that's a dandy. He calls it a dandy watch, a great watch, okay, and then he tells you, okay, but we don't have day or night in space, so can you please do it 24 hours
and take away the tachymeter
and take away the tachymeter because
no use.
Who needs
who
need definitely not in space. And we actually now took it off again on the recent Navitimer because it really was a bit absurd. You have to decide what you are. You can't be everything at once. We're not a racist chronograph with a Navitimer. So in a way, that's as tool watch chronograph as you can get, okay? The pioneer calls you, tells you, can you do that? And you say, of course I can, okay? You name it, you get it. So yeah, that's the story, and that's what we are showing now. And in a way, we very clearly decided not to do a reedition, okay? We've shown how well I think we can do reeditions, but this is something that deserves to be as modern as it can with the latest technologies. And of course, none of us wear astronauts' gloves today, so we gave it the regular 41 millimeter serrated bezel that it really needs to be functional. It's a lovely watch. It's very limited, and it's in a way a watch I think Scott Carpenter would very, very proudly wear.
If we resume the entire story of that Navitimer, my question is, as you are collecting chronographs, where exactly would you position that watch compared to other chronographs, to the majority of chronographs?
Don't collect chronographs generally, but I try to collect relevant chronographs, okay? Relevant chronographs I can afford. Let's reduce that a little bit. So I'm collecting tool watch chronographs primarily, and there isn't many watches. There's many lovely chronographs, but icon is a word thrown around so easily. Everybody calls himself an icon. Much of it actually on invented history, if you forgive me for saying that. And here we've got something that is truly iconic. What do I compare it to? It's older in its design, more or less unchanged. Okay, different sizes, different colors.
It's the Porsche.
Yeah, it's the that's where we are. There aren't that
the
many other.
Navitimer range and some other designs.
Yeah, it's been in continuous production since 1940. Of course, changing, etc., etc. It's as iconic as it gets. It has one huge advantage. And actually, all watches that are truly iconic are different in a way. They're different from all others. You see somebody in 5 meters distance, you have to look 2, 3, 4, 5 times if you want to see what watch he's wearing. The Navitimer is visible, clearly different from all the others. So that's
I think
what
even
makes
more than
it
5 meters.
And that's what makes an icon. It's not imitating. It has been copied countless times, but it's still the original. It's proudly so.
Something new on the Navitimer were then the contrasting subdials. They suddenly came up, and
it actually, again, very short slide step. Actually, the first to do contrasting subdial chronographs was again Breitling in 1957 on the first Super Ocean. And because they saw that underwater the contrast was a lot better and gave them better visibility. And then they started to roll it out through the whole line of chronographs. So in early 1963, very shortly after the 1962 Scott Carpenter flight, all the watches, all the Navitimers get new dials. We call that execution 3, execution 4, execution 5. As I said, we're moving to contrasting subdials in 63. Then we go way also 63 to 64. We have so-called serrated bezels like we have them today, functionally actually better and easier to grip than the original rise speeds, as lovely as they were. But it's a tool watch, and we go from 40 millimeter bezels to with a larger beads, 40.3, invisibly larger, but still better to grip. We go to 41 millimeter bezels in 1964 with a serrated bezel, and that's where we stay for what we call the small case Navitimer, again, for the period huge, today considered still nicely large, but relatively small. One thing that is important, we've got a relatively short and very long, comparatively, video to cover 70 years of history. We can't cover all the executions, all the variations, all the logos, because we'd sit here for hours. But ask in the comments, and I'll be happy to step in and answer all the questions that I can.
Concerning
Navitimers, of course.
What?
Or Breitling or whatever. Ask me, and I may have an answer.
To be clear, please keep it on the Navitimer.
Also a question often asked, waterproof. What about that? Why is the Navitimer, even the modern one, only 30 meters waterproof? And there's an easy answer. If you want it as a slide rule chronograph, a functioning slide rule chronograph, all those ideas about setting crowns, etc., they make the slide rule a pure decoration. You can't use it anymore as a pilot. Of course, you may ask who really uses this as a, but I mean, you have to stay true to being a tool watch or stop producing it. Doing something that looks like a tool watch but doesn't have the function anymore is a way I hope Breitling will never go. So if you want to stay with the functionality of the Navitimer, the only way to make it truly waterproof, 100, 200, 300 meters, people think they need it. No, of course they don't. You need a geared bezel. And Breitling actually had that issue not only today, they had the same issue in 1967 when they redesigned the Navitimer and launched the option of a 100 or 200 meter waterproof case. It was for the experts here and the collectors here, it was done by Epsa Picaret, the guys who did most of the iconic dive watches that were ever manufactured, very, very specialized in designing waterproof cases. And as you see on the watch, yes, it's perfectly functional, but it adds 6 millimeters in diameter to the Navitimer and makes the large watch a huge watch. And the Navitimer has to lose a lot of that lightness and elegance that it really always had. So it was an option and still would be an option, but it's the only way.
Yeah.
You either decide
to... We have to be clear that today people buy a certain watch not for the tool purpose. They buy a Navitimer because they like the design and they maybe feel comfortable wearing such a design. And so they are buying a daily watch. They don't use as a tool watch because they don't even know how to handle the slide rule, including me. I never learned it. But I loved these Navitimers that I'm wearing here, limited edition of one with a blue dial that was 500 pieces. I just loved the look. Yeah, it was a specific look. I loved it and I bought it. And okay, if you buy your daily watch, you want to be as waterproof as possible. But I loved your way of explaining. Let's stay honest, let's stay a tool watch. Please, Breitling, don't change it. We have a tool watch. The watch is done for this, and then it's not waterproof. Then take care.
It is, again.
No, take care.
It's perfectly. How long have you been wearing that watch?
I never had any issues.
And nobody
never had any issues.
So for daily life, you don't swim with it.
No,
okay, you don't go to a sauna with it. You don't dive with it.
No.
But for everyday life, I know. There hundreds, thousands.
Super Oceans and other watches.
And again, and I know thousands of Navitimer owners. Actually, in repairs, it's funny, water damage on Navitimers is among the rarest because people take a bit of care. They don't.
Today it's magnetism.
Yeah. Okay, so it's perfectly wearable. And again, you would hate us if the functionality would be a lie only.
Yeah.
Okay, you'd hate it. You'd kill us for it, I assume. Okay. So again, we'll stay with 30 meter waterproofness or 200 or 300 or 500.
Yeah.
But then we lose the lightness, and the iconic design.
The watch is a two watch again. The watch will get or has its clear position in the Swiss watch history. 70 years. It will also be there in 90 years later, and maybe 110 and so on years later. So this is a watch.
It's one of the pillars of chronograph history. It's just there, and I think we've given him the pride and the strength again that it needs.
Yeah. And if you're still wondering about those 30 meters of water resistance, and we have been talking about the iconic design of also the Porsche 911, have you ever been thinking about driving a 911 Porsche in off-road conditions? You don't. It's not meant to be there, as the Navitimer is not meant to be there. So take it.
Don't take a dive in. That's all. Okay.
So thanks for watching this episode on WatchAdvisor on YouTube about the Navitimer 70 years of history. Lots of pictures. Fred Mandelbaum is reading the comments. He said it before. He's there to answer your comments. If you have specific questions, give him some days, and I'm happy to have him. Fred, thank you very much for.
It was a huge pleasure.
For
Austrians in Zurich. Why not? Viennese.
Meet in Zurich, yeah. Thanks for being here. For also showing us these watches and all the background stories. Thank you very much. It's
most welcome. It was a true pleasure.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget where the good stories are. WatchAdvisor on YouTube. Bye-bye.